Hello and welcome back to episode 16 of the MyBettingMate Kickoff, your home for all your football insights and discussion. We're talking A-League, we're talking EPL, and once again I'm joined by Nick Dabano. Welcome back, Nick.
No, thank you for having me, Matt.
Yep. And as always, we'll start closer to home. We'll have a look at the A-League. And this week I thought we'd have a quick look at a team that's, in the news for a lot of the wrong reasons. We're not sure if they're going to be around for too much longer. There's not really been any solution to their ownership dilemma, and that's obviously the Newcastle Jets. They have the potential to really upset the Premiership race with 2 games left to play. They play both the top 2 teams, Wellington Phoenix and the Central Coast Mariners, at home. In a season that's been very much hit and miss. It's as bad as it's been off the field. There have been some, highlights on the field from a team that, has struggled with a lack of resources and has very much been up against it this season. Can they, at least finish the season having had a bit of an impact on the Premiership race?
Well, they've gotten 7 points out of their possible 9 out of the last 3 games. It's been a little bit of a positive patch for Newcastle after the international break, playing spoiler to an extent for Melbourne City. We know Melbourne City is still firmly in the race for 6th, but, just sort of gave them a little bit of a knock. I mean, you look at the other 3 games, or the 2 games that preceded, or either side of those home games that Melbourne City have played, not including the derby, they've won 8-0 and 7-0, and then the Jets come to town. They don't concede a single goal. So as a credit to them, they beat Sydney FC at home, and then on the weekend they came away with a win against the Brisbane Roar, which it really hurt Brisbane's finals chances and all but ended them this week. So, They certainly can. They've got 2 more games at home this season against Wellington and Central Coast, and really the Premiership race is actually in their hands because, they can basically hand the Premiership to the Mariners this week because we know the quirks of the new rules with that, it's not goal difference this year, it's games won. So if Newcastle beats Wellington this week and the Mariners do get a win over Adelaide the following day, basically the Mariners are premiers. Not basically, they are the premiers. They can't be knocked off because they would have won 2 more games than Wellington despite being 3 points clear with 1 game to go. So conversely though, if they don't sort it out this week and they give, the Mariners and the Wellingtons, they give Wellington a chance and the Mariners and them are still going for it in that final day, they could knock their old rivals off the top of the ladder and give the Wellington Phoenix a chance to win the Premiership. So it's a fascinating one for them, and it's good to see that they're playing with some spirit, playing with, plenty of gusto at the moment. Robbie Stanton's done a really good job this season with the limited resources he's had. Apostolos Stamatolopoulos has been one of the stories of the season. He's thrust himself back into the Golden Boot race with Fornaroli and Taggart not scoring on the weekend and getting a goal. They've unearthed some really good young players like Clayton Taylor. Mark Natter's taken another step forward. Ryan Scott's really established himself as a first-choice A-League goalkeeper as well. So they've got a really good base there. But there's still so much uncertainty with how things go from here. I mean, is this the final 2 weeks of the Newcastle Jets? We really hope not. I mean, this comes at a very interesting time for Newcastle because, their women's team are doing really well. They got through to the semis, a good win against Western United last week out at Ironbark. I mean, they survived the lights shutting down there for a little bit and were able to come away with the win. So, I mean, if the men's team can end this season on a little bit of a high and, they can come away with 2 more wins, it'd be great for them. But we really hope that in the next, couple of weeks, we start to get some more certainty as to what the future is of the Newcastle Jets. And hopefully by the time a ball is kicked in anger next season as well, the Jets will be back because, they're a big part of Australian football history and, they've got something special building out there and hopefully Robbie Stanton will be able to, come back next season and mould the squad more in his image with greater resources. So I guess we'll wait and see what happens in the coming months.
Yeah, it must just be so hard for that group of players to play through the uncertainty. They're obviously playing for an A-League opportunity, be that at Newcastle Jets or at somewhere else next season. So there's plenty on the line for them, I guess, as individuals, as players looking to secure their future in the league. But yeah, hopefully there is a saviour out there for the Jets because they've been such an integral part of the A-League's history, of the story of Australian football over the last couple of decades. And it's a very proud footballing community in Newcastle. So hopefully there is a positive outcome for them at the end of the season, but also you recognise that it's very hard for essentially the league and other clubs to continue propping up one of their opponents essentially, and suffer losses on their behalf as well. So hopefully there is a good outcome. But I guess the other talking points for this week are really within the games themselves this week. So when we look at the fixtures, we might skip ahead to Western Sydney taking on Melbourne City. We'll look at that game first because that seems to be the match with the most riding on it from a finals point of view. In many ways, it's sort of a final before the finals.
Yeah, I mean, Saturday afternoon is going to be at CommBank Stadium. Two teams that are going to be desperate. The Wanderers, heartbreaking loss. They got right back into the game, when Zach Sapsford got that equaliser right at the end. You thought maybe they're just going to pinch something from this one. But right at the end there, Jaden Kucharski stepping up and scoring that goal. And then Melbourne City, it was all on them. They just had to get the win, and they did with some fashion. I mean, 8-0. 8-0 against Perth Glory. They've had 3 of these types of wins this year, and they're still not even inside the top 6, which is just incredible. I think they've scored close to 50% of their goals this season in those 3 games alone, which is just amazing to think about. So, essentially, if Melbourne City don't win this game, if the Wanderers win, it's all but over. I think actually it might be over for Melbourne City if they don't win. So the Wanderers can book their place in the finals. But this is going to be a really interesting game to see how City can, if they can keep that momentum going. They've got so much quality, so much talent. The Wanderers got pillaged again with injury on Saturday with Brandon Barella going down, Tom Beadling, and now Melbourne City with, seeing how Tolgai Arslan's playing and Jamie McLaren getting back on the score sheet, Lecky starting to find some form as well. It's a really big time for them. So, it really is winner takes all on Saturday afternoon at CommBank. But, you look at the rest of this finals race. I mean, the teams that are sort of within a chance, like Adelaide still have a chance. The time of recording, we still don't know whether they're going to beat Western United tomorrow in Tarneet. But they had a great opportunity to cut the gap against MacArthur and surrendered that, then could have at least got a point from that, but didn't, with Iran Kunda's late penalty being saved. They win that. They give themselves a chance this weekend. Brisbane, mathematically still alive. They have to beat Melbourne Victory. But it's really in Melbourne City's control. And City know that, they win this game and they go into a final round game against Western United, that they should have it their own way and should be able to wrap up 6th place.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting contest in Western Sydney Wanderers. I fear Wanderers, having recovered from their last sort of period of dipping into self-destruction mode, might be heading back in there. Some very interesting post-game comments from the coach, Marco Redan. It's a very interesting tactic when you start, throwing players under the bus effectively and telling them that they're not good enough in the public eye, particularly young players too, And obviously we've seen some comments from the fans group who have come out and obviously not happy with what's happening at the Wanderers. So their support's going to be crucial to helping the Wanderers get over the line. And if they're not all in, that home ground advantage sort of fades away, right? So, it'll be an interesting game. Do you see Melbourne City winning that? How do you see that going?
I actually see this ending as a draw. I think City's big Achilles heel has been their form away from Amy Park this year. They've had some really good wins at Amy Park, but just when they've travelled, they've had some really dismal results. So that's going to be the thing I think that works against them. The Wanderers are going to be desperate. The only thing I think that's working in City's favour is they have the wood over Western Sydney. They beat them 7-0 last time, and that feels like an eternity ago now. City both teams have to win this game, but particularly City. They have had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to cut into this deficit. It's now or never for them, but I still think it's going to be a draw, and it's going to go right down to the final day where the Wanderers play Melbourne Victory and Melbourne City play Western United. So they might need a bit of help from their old rivals to get them over the line anyway, but they wouldn't want to be relying on that regardlessly.
Yeah, I thought Melbourne City were excellent on the weekend. I know that was against a Perth Glory who, you commented last week have sort of checked out. You said that they may be looking for their holiday destination. Some might say they're already on the holidays. But, I do think that sort of performance, particularly when you compare to what Western Sydney went through on the weekend, just sets this up for another strong showing from City. And I think they'll get the win, but we'll wait and see what happens there. The other games this weekend, Western United hosting Adelaide United, which is obviously tomorrow night. So hopefully we get this out before then. A quick tip there.
Adelaide win this game. I think Western United got a few injuries at this point in the year, and I think Adelaide are going to bounce back and win this game.
Yeah, I've got Adelaide winning that one as well. Newcastle Jets versus Wellington Phoenix. yeah, we sort of spoke about the Jets already a little bit. Can they play Kingmakers this weekend?
They've already beaten them once this year. They're the only team to beat them at the Cake Tin this season, which is something they definitely have over Wellington. So that adds another fascinating wrinkle to this. They're not going to beat them. Be boring again. I'm going to say this game ends as a draw, but they're just going to throw a little bit of a spanner in the works in that premiership race and give the Mariners a chance to maybe kick ahead.
Yeah, I thought I definitely don't think Jets will win this. I've teed between the draw and a Wellington win. I just have a feeling Wellington are gonna get up. I think Giancarlo Italiano has done a very good job of getting his team to play the way they need to win the occasion. And I think this will be another one of those occasions, and they'll send hopefully the Premiership race into the final week. Melbourne Victory taking on Brisbane Roar. Any reason to tip against Victory here?
Only reason would be is if the top 6 race is still alive. Brisbane's already beaten Victory once this year, but I think Victory at home, they need to win. They can't make the top 2 now. I mean, they had a really good chance to get back into it. They conceded late against Wellington last week. But just to wrap up third, put yourself in a position where, you might not. Well, funnily enough, I mean, if they finish third, they might still have to go back to Wellington because Wellington could finish second. But you want to put yourself in a position where you can host a final. I think Sydney and Macarthur are both hot on their heels. So, I think Melbourne Victory will win this game. Yep,
I've got Victory winning this one as well. Macarthur FC versus Sydney FC. Could shuffle the order in the top 6 there.
I think it's essentially a battle to see who hosts the rematch in the 4-5 elimination final. I think there's a lot riding on this game for both teams. It's a gutsy win for Macarthur last week and similarly for Sydney. Macarthur have all but wrapped up a finals berth, which is a great turnaround from last season. It's big for Macarthur, big for the club. And if they can host a final, it'll be massive for them as well. And I think just trying to get a bit of excitement around the Bulls. But I think that this game will also, again, going to end as a draw here. This will be an entertaining contest, though. I think Sydney, they lost against them earlier this year in a game that Macarthur, Sydney went down 10 early and Macarthur were able to kick away and come away with a 2-0 win. But this will be a lot more even and it's going to be a very interesting game, but I think it will end as a draw.
Yep. I'll go hard to tip against the draw there as well, but I think the home factor might help Macarthur out, so I'll tip a Macarthur win. Central Coast Mariners taking on Adelaide United. Bit of travelling for Adelaide this week, obviously, from Tarneet now to Central Coast. Where do you see that one going?
Bit of travel for the Mariners as well. AFC Cup duties too. So both teams going to be facing a bit of an interesting week to rotate the squads and keep the bodies fresh. Adelaide's got nothing to lose. They have to win against Western United first and foremost to put themselves in a position where they can still make the top 6 going into that game. But even then, by the time they get there, it might still be out of their control depending on what happens on Saturday. I think the Mariners win this game. They've done a really good job being able to manage their squad and get results even when the fixtures have piled up. Mark Jackson's done really well rotating between formations, whether it's been going a bit more pragmatic or going a little bit more on the front foot. And he might look to, preserve some key bodies in this game against Adelaide and, go with a full-strength squad in the AFC Cup, which I think is completely fair. I think you've got to, prioritise an opportunity to go as far as you can in Asia and back what you have to get the job done here. So I think they'll win this game, but it will be a tight one and fascinating to see where Adelaide are at going into that contest.
Yeah, I guess so much is riding on all the games before this to just sort of dictate, what Adelaide needs to do on the day, and that might affect the way that they approach the game or just even the players' moods, heading into that game. I think Central Coast obviously still have the Premiership to play for. They've been the masters of balancing their competing commitments this year. And I think, as we get to that business end of the season, I think I'd back them in to continue to do well. So, Central Coast Mariners winners there for me. Perth Glory taking on Western United to round out the round. A game with, not a heap riding on it, to be honest.
It's just pride at this point. I mean, if you're Perth, you just want to get something from this. You expect a response back at home. Final home game of the season. Western, they're playing in midweek in Tarneet. I think Perth will respond and actually win this game. I think they'll want to end on a high. You don't want to finish last as well, and this is essentially playing off, to avoid that. Regardless, you've got to play those Australia Cup playoffs next year or later this year. But I think just avoiding the wooden spoon tag is really important. So I'm going to say that the Glory win this game because Western have got a few injuries at this point. I think that they've had a good run to, sort of stabilise things and, give themselves a fighting chance. But I think the Glory are going to be too strong on the road.
Yeah, I think Perth players will definitely want to be, making a statement after going down 8-0. Winds of change are in effect at Perth too, so no one spot's guaranteed next year. There could be wholesale changes there. So yeah, I think the players, just by virtue of wanting to prove to the new establishment that they're worthy of their spot at Perth, will put in a much improved performance and should get the win there. So that wraps up the A-League. We'll have a quick look at the Premier League, where it's been a couple of key results over the weekend. We looked a couple of weeks ago at some of the teams that might shape the title race, and Aston Villa was definitely one that we thought could have an impact, and they've certainly done that. They picked up a massive 2-0 win over Arsenal, which for the Gunners essentially means they're now relying on Manchester City, not just dropping points, but really they have to lose a game, and Arsenal has to be ready to respond to that to get back into the title race. I think my biggest fear for the likes of Liverpool and Arsenal, that was the earlier that this title race got onto Manchester City's boot, the harder it was going to be for them to win.
Yeah.
And it's really come at the worst possible time for Arsenal.
Absolutely. I mean, galvanised by that draw against Bayern Munich, which was talking about the history between those two teams in the Champions League, getting a draw against them was a pretty decent result, and they probably should have felt they could win that. I thought going into this with, a little bit more rest than Villa, who played in the Conference League as well, you would have backed Arsenal to win this game 9 times out of 10, and it was looking like it was going to a 0-0, and then Villa just shot out of a cannon in the last few minutes and were able to come away with a win. I mean, it's a big feather in the cap of Unai Emery, who gets Villa back into fourth because Tottenham were battered by Newcastle.
Yep.
Liverpool, dropping points earlier in the day against Palace. I mean, it's been a rough week for Liverpool, has it? I mean, battered by Atalanta at Anfield in midweek, and then Palace here, drawing against United last week. Exactly what we sort of feared. Have they run out of energy? Have they just exhausted everything and just trying to stay in it, that now it's all caught up with them, all the injuries, all the quick turnarounds and the Klopp playing style, I fear for what could come. But you look at City, they just handled business against Luton like they should. So, yeah, I think going into these final few rounds, we have now a third different leader in 3 weeks, and it's now in City's boots. And, you know what, Matt, I fear for what, for Arsenal Liverpool's hopes now, because this is where City want to be. We know what comes next. And whoever it is, whoever can potentially cause a little bit of an upset, as you said, one of those teams need to be ready to take those points on offer and try and just stay alive for as long as they can.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the only thing is really that City is still competing in the FA Cup as well as their European commitments, adds an extra game into the fixture, or potentially 2 extra games to the fixture list for them. So I think if there's anything for Arsenal, Liverpool to hold on to, it might be that. But yeah, Liverpool in particular, the goal they conceded, I think Jurgen Klopp's reaction on the sideline sort of told you a lot about where they're at. It was just the press wasn't there. Every pass that Crystal Palace made in the build-up to that goal, the Liverpool defender was probably 3 or 4 yards further away than they otherwise would be when they're at full capacity. And they took their chance and they held it out. So, I mean, Liverpool losing twice in a row at Anfield now in basically a week between European football and the Premier League. I mean, they've gone so long without losing there. It's looking like it might end up being a bit of a downer on the end of the what's been a spectacular reign for Jurgen Klopp. But we'll wait and see. We'll have a quick look at the other end of the table. We've got a very tight relegation scrap. Still a few teams looking nervously over their shoulder. Everton, Nottingham Forest, not helped by their points deductions, obviously, and I'm sure those deductions will be challenged. But yeah, how do we see the relegation race sort of unfolding? We've got Sheffield United. They're really struggling with just the 16 points. Burnley are next with 20 points. Luton Town on 25 points. Nottingham Forest safe at the moment with 26 points, Everton 27 points, and then Brentford with a bit of a gap on 32 points. There's a few games between these sides in the coming weeks. Everton, for example, still have to play Nottingham Forest. Luton Town have to play Brentford. Everton have to play Luton as well. So Luton might be looking at the run-in and thinking, it doesn't look the best, but if we can just beat the teams around us, we could be safe. Yeah,
well, usually it takes, in the relegation scrap, 40 points is usually the magic marker, but it could be less this year. I mean, on a normal season where, Nottingham and Everton haven't got points deductions, especially Everton, they're almost there. But, unfortunately, they're in this position now where they've still got to scratch for every point that's possible and try to keep themselves above the drop. Sheffield United, all but gone. They have to beat Burnley this week to really give themselves a chance and rely on other results. Burnley win that game, though. They're right back in the hunt. Like, suddenly it makes things even more exciting, more interesting, and they have to win that game. Luton, I mean, you mentioned they've got some big games coming up against the likes of Brentford and Everton, which they have to win. But Nottingham as well, that game against Everton coming up is another massive game. So for me right now, I think Sheffield and Burnley, if I had to pick, I still think they're going to go down this season. I think Sheffield, their papers are all but stamped. Burnley, I think they can stay in the hunt, but it's going to be tough. And I think it comes down to, in my opinion, just looking at the quality of the teams. I think Everton will kick away, but I think it's probably between Luton or Nottingham Forest. And to be honest, I can't split them. I think it's almost dead even. And Luton have been gallant. They've been fighting hard, and Nottingham as well. So I'm fascinated to see how this one goes, but I think it's going to go right down to the final day between those two teams.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a tough one to pick. If Forest end up going down, it's going to be very interesting to see how the whole
or Everton
appeals
for that matter,
Everton, how the appeals go down after the fact. Will that change the status of the clubs? I mean, we're talking about such huge differences in financials for these clubs, whether they're playing in the Championship or the Premier League. So they will spare no expense fighting these, points deductions to the nth degree. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. I do think Luton Town might just pull themselves out of the relegation scrap heap and send Nottingham Forest down. But if that's the case, I'm very interested to see sort of how it plays out off the park after that. But we'll have a look at the fixtures to come this weekend. It's obviously an FA Cup weekend. We'll have a quick look at the semis as well. Luton Town taking on Brentford, one of these games at the bottom end of the table. Brentford, didn't really factor too much into our relegation discussion, but they lose a couple of games and they're right back in the thick of it. Particularly if they lose to the likes of Luton. This is at Luton. How do you see this one going?
Oh, this is really tough. Going to go a draw in this game. I think Luton have shown a lot recently, Brentford as well, but I just can't separate either of these two teams. I think that it ends up in a score draw there down at Luton.
Yeah, Luton, the vast majority of their wins have come at home this year. Brentford not been the best away from home, but certainly better than Luton have. So, yeah, I think a draw is probably the smart money in this one, but we'll wait and see. Sheffield United taking on Burnley. Burnley really need to win this, and Sheffield United will be hoping to win just to try and give themselves the sense of potentially surviving. But I feel like, Burnley really have to put everything into this game.
Yeah, I think Burnley win this one. They push themselves and get themselves in a position to fight. Sheffield, unfortunately for them, I think that will all but end it. And any hope of them potentially staying up, it's been a difficult season for them. They've only won 3 games this year. But if they win, look, you never know. But even then, it's going to be probably a little bit too hard. But that would probably be catastrophic for Burnley by the same token.
Yep. Wolverhampton Wanderers taking on Arsenal. This was probably the game that I thought was Arsenal's danger game. I didn't expect them to drop the points against Aston Villa. They obviously have midweek Champions League duties as well, and they're still in a chance there. So I don't believe they'd be thinking about rotating or anything like that. They'll be full strength for that game. Does that play into how this game might pan out?
It may. It certainly may. Because they're going to Munich. They've got to win that game to, advance to the next round. But I do think that they will bounce back and win this game. I just have this gnawing sense that was a disappointing result against Aston Villa. And I think that they will find that balance between, what is more important for them. Is it making a Champions League run or is it, winning the league? I think if you can balance both, great. But considering how things are at right now where they've lost control, I think they will find that unique balance and that delicate balance of, getting some of their stars to be able to play both and not completely exhaust them to the bone. So I do think that Arsenal bounce back and win at the Molineux against Wolves.
Yeah, I just have a sneaky feeling that we might see a draw here. I did think that this would be the game that I worried the most about for Arsenal. And I guess given the result on the weekend, I still hold those fears for them. So, yeah, I'll go a draw there. Everton taking on Nottingham Forest. Obviously, Everton playing not too long after we record this podcast, but they're in action against Nottingham Forest in a game that has a direct impact on their survival hopes. How do you see this one going?
Everton win this one. I think this is the game that, really kicks them clear of the bottom three. So many games in this relegation scrap that have so much of a say in how things are going to go in the next few weeks. But I think Everton at home, they'll be willed on by their fans and they'll come away with the win against Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, Forest just the 2 wins away from home. I do think that will favour Everton heavily. So, Everton the winners there for me as well. Aston Villa taking on Bournemouth. Villa really looking to consolidate on fourth place. Bournemouth, they've survived. They're in the league for another year. Is that enough for them?
Yeah, I think Villa win this game quite convincingly. Bournemouth now mid-table. It's all secured for them. I think Villa are able to consolidate their place in fourth for another week with a win.
Yeah, Aston Villa there for me as well. Crystal Palace taking on West Ham United. 2 teams sort of just, hanging in there in mid-table. West Ham still have some European competition to worry about as well. How do you see this one going?
Well, West Ham need to go for it. They're at home against Leverkusen in midweek, who have already won the Bundesliga title, so they can now focus on Leverkusen, that is, focus fully on West Ham being 2-0 up. That's actually probably more of a worry for West Ham because they were very lucky, West Ham. They did not go down by a lot more in that game. They're back at home, though, so they're going to really try and, go for it in that game and maybe be the first team to beat Leverkusen all season. But, how much energy that takes out of them going to this game against Palace, I mean, for them, European football's alive. Still a chance for them to play in Europa League or the Conference League, but... I think the eggs in the basket will be in that game over at home at the Olympic Stadium. So that might work against them, but I think this game will end as a draw against Crystal Palace.
Yep, I'll go a Palace win here. Fulham taking on Liverpool. Liverpool obviously really needing to win this one. There's no room for error now.
Yeah.
I mean, the result midweek against Atalanta pretty much, do they even... How much energy they put into recovering that versus, trying to stay in the title race.
Look, you know what Liverpool are going to do. They're going to go to Bergamo and try and push Atalanta and try and make things interesting. And if there's any team that will back themselves to come back in a game and get back into a tie, it is Liverpool. But then again, though, the stakes are so high for them in the league that, with City playing in the Cup, and of course they will have a game in hand as a result, it will open the door for, Liverpool and Arsenal to kick ahead and take control of the title race. So... I think Liverpool win this game. I think they bounce back and get 3 points at Craven Cottage. But similarly, what is the balance? Does it get to a point in that game against Atalanta if it's still 3-0 and it's not looking likely? Do you just kind of go, okay, this is a lost cause. We're not going to be able to win the Europa League. Let's get back. Let's just focus on winning the league. But it's going to be a fascinating contest that by the time we get to that game on the weekend. Yep.
And then we've got FA Cup semi-final football as well, which is why Manchester City, Manchester United and Chelsea aren't playing over the weekend. All these games take place at Wembley. Manchester City taking on Chelsea, Manchester United taking on Coventry. Thoughts on the City-Chelsea FA Cup semi-clash?
I think City win this game. It's the last chance for silverware for Chelsea, but I just think City are going to be too strong. We could be looking at another treble season for them, and I think they're just going to flex against Chelsea, going to come away with quite a convincing win. And then conversely for United Coventry, I mean, I know that you might have some fears as a United fan of what might happen, but I think United are going to be too strong, and we'll get an all Manchester FA Cup final.
Yeah. I don't know what's worse, if we just bow out of the semis against Coventry, as embarrassing as that would be, or make a final and then lose to Manchester City in the final. I'm not sure. Not to be too negative about it. But look, I mean, all of United's eggs are in this basket now. And for Erik ten Hag, I really feel like
he has to win
it. He has to win this competition. If he doesn't, the new hierarchy at Old Trafford really does have a big call to make on him. So he'll obviously want to be the first coach in God knows how long to finish 2 seasons in a row with some silverware. And if he can do that, I think it's just so fun. It's just such slim margins can dictate whether this guy has a job or not next season. He's got a real point to prove to whether or not he's the man that this new hierarchy, should entrust with the rebuild at Old Trafford. And if it doesn't finish this season with a FA Cup, I'm not sure that they'll be able to side with him. Unfortunately, some suspect moves in the transfer market, which you can only assume he's had a big hand in. Whether that's spending all summer chasing a Mason Mount, who's struggled with injuries but really rarely looked the part this year. Chasing Amrabat as well, and that's not really worked out. So, yeah, it'd be very interesting to see how that sort of pans out. As disappointed as I've been with United as a fan this year, I do think they'll probably get over Coventry, but completely different kettle of fish in the final, whether they play City as I expect them to or Chelsea. So, yeah, well, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how that one pans out. There is another Premier League game which will take place probably before we catch up, which will be Arsenal taking on Chelsea after the FA Cup semi-finals. A lot of water to go under the bridge before that one, but given it'll happen before we probably catch up again, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, Gunners win this game. I think, Chelsea, look, it's been a tough year for them, but they've had this knack of getting up for the big games. But I think Arsenal at the Emirates are just going to be too strong. But how these two teams manage this hectic schedule will be another interesting little wrinkle to that. So, whether, Arsenal are a bit gassed by the lot of games, that'll be another thing to watch. But back at the Emirates, I back them.
I almost fancy Arsenal more in this game than I did in the Wolves game. So I'll go Arsenal here. Well, that's enough for this week. We've covered both the leagues. So thank you very much for joining us, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see you next week.